Hello, I'm Amanda Ihmels. I'm the oncology dietitian at the Bismarck Cancer Center. Today, I'll be speaking to you about hot topics on oncology nutrition. First things first, as an oncology dietitian, I practice through evidence-based science. That means that I look at where the research is coming from, how many subjects a particular study had, and can the results be duplicated. The majority of the information that I'm presenting today comes from the American Institute of Cancer Research, their New American Plate. The American Institute of Cancer Research has gathered nutrition-related information and has put it into easy to understand format. I practice more by focusing on the whole diet, leaning more towards plant-based eating. And nutrition isn't all or nothing. I believe that there are always foods and sometimes foods, and how often you're eating those foods is what makes the difference. You can see by this slide here that there are many different types of diets recommended for healthy eating. There's a Mediterranean diet, anti-inflammatory, the New American Plate, My Plate, which is from the USDA, and also the DASH diet. I feel the New American Plate is the easiest one to incorporate into our everyday lives. You can see that you're not needing to count the number of cups of fruits or vegetables, grains, or even beans in a day. We don't have to worry about ounces or how much a particular food weighs. We're focusing more on what the shape of our plate looks like. With the New American Plate, we're focusing on 2/3 of our plate being from fruits, vegetables, and beans, and the other third coming from any animal-based proteins like fish or meat. This picture here is a great way to illustrate how we're trying to change our plates. The picture on the left is what I would call the typical American plate or the typical North Dakotan plate. You can see that there's steak, mashed potatoes, peas, and arguably too many peas for most North Dakotans on the plate. And we're trying to move over to one of the two plates on the right. You can see that it's full of color, and it has mostly plants on the plate by using either quinoa or a bed of vegetables for your chicken. We're just trying to reduce the amount of red meat that we're eating and focusing on more fruits and vegetables. Organic and genetically modified organisms is another topic that I get asked lots of questions about, so let's spend a little bit of time talking about it. USDA organic certification is a very strict regulation that farmers or food producers have to meet. There's a list called the Dirty Dozen or the Clean 15 that lists the most common foods that have the most herbicides or pesticides on them as they make it to market. And those foods would be the ones that would be recommended to consume organic if that's allowed for in your budget. However, the goal is to eat more fruits and vegetables. So if organic foods don't fit into your budget, it is okay. The majority of the studies that we have surrounding survivorship and fruits and vegetable intake doesn't look at whether or not those individuals are consuming organic foods. We know that if you're eating a diet that's rich in fruits and vegetables and whole grains, you'll have better outcomes regardless if you're eating organic foods. Genetically modified organisms is when a food or animal has been genetically modified to make it easier to grow or produce more of in an area where it may not normally be able to grow or be produced at higher quantities. There's a wide degree of genetic modification. My favorite example of the one that we're most familiar with would be Honeycrisp apples. Those were created in a lab in the University of Minnesota by combining DNA from multiple apples. We don't have strong evidence to support that this is good or bad, but there is a project going on currently called Non-Genetically Modified Project, and it's a way for consumers to be informed about the foods that they're eating. So if you see this symbol on a product, it means that the particular food has not gone through any type of genetic modification. Soy foods is another very common area that I'm asked about frequently. There's a misconception that soy food can be dangerous for women who have estrogen-positive breast cancer, and there's been a movement to avoid soy foods. But in reality, we know that 2 to 3 servings of whole soy food is safe. Whole soy foods are soybeans, tofu, soy milk, edamame, miso, and tempeh. There's been several studies which have showed improved prognosis with soy intake. For example, we know that Asian countries have lower rates of breast cancer and better survival rates than ours in the United States, and they consume higher amounts of soy than we do in the United States. The isoflavones in whole soy foods are more effective than isolated soy protein and isoflavone supplements due to a synergistic effect with all of the vitamins, minerals, fibers that are in those whole soy foods. However, soy does have weak estrogen-like activity in the body. Research supports that it does not impact estrogen receptive cancers. And then the million-dollar question, does sugar feed cancer? I'm asked this question every day. It's not as simple as a black and white yes or no answer. It's more complicated. We know that there's a correlation between refined carbohydrates and complex carbohydrates. So for example, a refined carbohydrate would be cake, cookies, pop, and a complex carbohydrate would be those carbohydrates that you get from fruits, vegetables, beans, whole grains. We know that diets rich in refined carbohydrates lead to obesity, increased inflammation, a poor immune system, and an unhealthy gut microbiome, therefore increasing our cancer risk. Also, during cancer workup, patients will typically undergo what's called a PET scan, and they'll drink a glucose solution, a sugary solution containing a radioactive isotope. When the patient then goes through the scan, areas of their body that are hypermetabolic, meaning using that sugar faster than other cells, will easily and quickly light up on that PET scan. Areas of hypermetabolic cells could be cancer cells, they could be cells recovering from an injury or recovering from a surgery, and so it's important to take that into consideration. The ketogenic diet has been very trendy lately. There have been very small studies showing slightly improved survival time in a very specific type of cancer called the glioblastoma multiforme. Flax and flax seed are very high in alpha-linoleic acid and lignans. Lignans are suspected to play a role in preventing estrogen-dependent cancer by slowing cell growth. However, most of these studies were done in animal studies. We know that it may help reduce the risk of metastases in breast and prostate cancers. However, significant amounts of flax, greater than 2 tablespoons a day, may interact with tamoxifen. It may enhance how tamoxifen works, causing toxicity. Ground flax should be stored in the freezer to make it last longer. Cancer survivors often ask what supplements they should be doing to reduce their risk of recurrence. I like to recommend that we meet our needs through food first, although we all know that we're not perfect eaters. I will typically recommend supplements if we know that you're clinically deficient. So for example, have you recently had your vitamin D level checked? Do we know if it's low or at an adequate level? Then we would recommend supplementation if it's low. It's important to watch for drug-nutrient interactions. As an oncology dietitian, I have access to the natural medicine database where I can search through a wide variety of supplements and their interactions with medications. Through my work with patients, I've identified supplements that patients are taking that have decreased how well their chemotherapy works or may be linked to the type of cancer that those individuals now have. However, it's estimated that 80% of survivors are using dietary supplements. You must tell your care team what you're taking, whether it's your pharmacist, doctor, nurses. It's important to have what supplements you're taking on record. But my general rule of thumb is if it's not causing harm and if it's not interacting with medication, it's generally okay to take. Thank you for joining me today, and I hope you learned something new. To learn more about oncology nutrition or to ask any questions, contact the Bismarck Cancer Center through social media or at bismarckcancercenter.com.